So in this one, we've got a manager who has his own personal account. Not a work account, it's in his own name. It's a large retailer with a number of branches. So he follows a number of stores, so up to 100 stores. And following a kind of direction from senior management, these stores follow him back. So he's got 65 stores following his personal account. And he says, prepare yourself for more stars here. The first one is astonishing. He doesn't like some people. He doesn't like his dad particularly. He's a very keen Sunderland fan though. He doesn't like dentists. He doesn't like caravan drivers. Or people who play golf, it would seem. So he has some fairly strong opinions about all people in all walks of life. I suppose the interesting one about this is none of this is about work. So he doesn't mention work, he doesn't mention his colleagues, he doesn't say how miserable he is about going to work tomorrow. He's exclusively voicing his opinions on various different groups of people. So the only connection with Joe Blogs Limited is that he follows 100 stores and they follow him back. And what he says, so his defence in the disciplinary process was he didn't ask or give permission for anyone to follow him, so out of his control. As we've said, nothing to do with his job, it's just communicating with his friends outside work. Interesting use of language communication. There's no reference to work, as we've said, or that he was an employee in his own time, not in working hours. And I think crucially, as we've said, it had not been established that any member of the public or indeed staff had accessed the Twitter feed, that they'd seen it. There'd been no complaint from a member of the public or a colleague saying he's made these kind of comments, they're inappropriate. I mean, as I say, I think probably our conclusion is because it's outside of work, although it's kind of fairly serious language he's using, it might be difficult to establish that this is a workplace issue, but nevertheless perhaps a rap on the knuckles and an indication that perhaps he needs to kind of distance himself even more, perhaps unfollow those stores. The actual case was a Mr. Laws and Game Retail Limited, and they took a very strong view. They decided that it was gross misconduct, mainly because they were concerned that anyone following any of the stores could have effectively linked into his profile and seen everything he was writing, and that was not language they wanted to be associated with. So they were fundamentally concerned about the reputational side of things. They took the view, the disciplinary officer said that everything he was saying was very offensive and kind of not just derogatory but potentially discriminatory. I mean, I don't think there is actually any form of discrimination technically in there. And the Employment Tribunal said it was unfair, that they shouldn't, effectively, as we've said, that it shouldn't have been a fair dismissal. He should have retained his job. And the Employment Appeal Tribunal effectively overturned the decision of the Employment Tribunal and, for all intents and purposes, said it was a fair dismissal. And that was fundamentally because the employer, the Employment Tribunal stood in the employer's shoes and said, we would have done this, and technically that is wrong. But as we've said, there were questions over kind of reputation and those kind of things. The appeal tribunal didn't feel the employment tribunal had fully established those. So it got sent back to the employment tribunal, and I do not know what the answer is, because these things never get reported. So a bit unresolved there, I'm afraid. But as we've seen, social media is a bit of a nightmare, and employees will say anything. I think they forget, as we probably all do, that anyone can read what we're saying, and there can be repercussions. As I said before, cases are fact-specific, so the tribunals won't give us any guidance. So we cannot go through a checklist and say, we've ticked 3 out of 5, so that's okay, we can dismiss. You have to look at each one individually. And that may work in an employer's favour, it might work in an employee's favour. I think the key thing is looking at the facts, what happened, investigating those, considering what the employee's defence is, so balancing out those mitigating factors. And then not jumping to a conclusion that it's gross misconduct and therefore they're out. Balancing everything out and working it through and following a fair process. And as we said right at the start, a clear policy that has been communicated to staff is going to help you. It's all very well having a handbook that's sat on a dusty shelf in the back office somewhere that no one knows about. If you have a policy, it doesn't have to be 200 pages. It could be very simple, like think what you type when you are using social media. Do not use our name when using social media. Do not reference work. Do not reference confidential information. Just a kind of 5, 6, 10, whatever, guidelines of what your expectations are. Ping it around in an email, and then you set your expectations for staff. And if they do go wrong, they do act out of turn, then you've got something to rely on there. You've got some kind of, well, we told you about this. You're not acting on common sense here. As I said, think of all the factors, so how many followers, and it's all very well tweeting terrible things, but actually if you've only got 4 people reading it, it's clearly there's not going to be a significant impact if you've got 1,000 followers or whatever it might be, or it's been retweeted 100 times or whatever it might be. Clearly that's going to be a factor. Looking at actually whether anything bad has happened, so whether there has been that customer complaint, whatever it might be. Did anyone actually see it? As I say, how many followers are there? Did it happen at work? So is this actually not just what was done, but when it was done? Also relevant. And again, whether work and the employer has been mentioned. As I say, consider all the relevant factors, ending on the bell. And then finally, is it gross misconduct? It doesn't automatically mean dismissal. Make sure you follow a process and phone me for help. And that's all I've got for you. I think I've filled my time. Does anyone have any questions?